Right, hopefully everyone can see my screen with the presentation on. Can do. Is it presenting properly now? I've pressed the button, Gemma.
It is.
Excellent. So morning everyone, welcome to the second of our South Warwickshire Place health events that we've run. Obviously today we're virtual and we've noted some technical issues with people's cameras, etc. So feel free to dip in and out of camera view if you need to. Very pleased today to have support from Tom Day, who's the South Warwickshire Place Planning and Development Manager, who's going to do an update for us on the South Warwickshire Place programme. And we're also joined today by Amanda Evans, who's the Team Wilder Director, and Anna Wright, Health and Wellbeing Manager from the Warwickshire Wildlife Trust, who are going to give us some inspiring content around environmental engagement and help us along with some discussion topics later. So thanks to Anna and Amanda for joining us to help with that today. So you're all muted, I'm afraid, at the moment. So if you would remain muted while we're presenting, that would be really helpful. The a couple more people. The session agenda will hopefully come up in a second. So our aims for today's session are to review some approaches to climate and environment, which are one of the priorities of the South Warwickshire Place programme, to explore opportunities for partnership working and collaboration in relation to environment and climate, and look at how nature can support and improve employees and volunteers' wellbeing. The infographic on the screen is the logo for the South Warwickshire Place programme, and shows you the geographic area that's covered under that South Warwickshire Place banner. So we're doing the introductions and welcome now through myself, and then Tom will do a place update for us. We'll be doing a brief overview of the findings from the previous network for voluntary community social enterprise sector organisations in South Warwickshire, and then we're going to have some content delivery through our colleagues from Warwickshire Wildlife Trust, and we'll have a short break for you to restore yourselves and get a cup of coffee, and then we'll come back in for some group sessions. Based on timings for today's event, if I can ease a little bit of time back from the agenda, I'll do a bit of a partner network update at the end in the close. So be prepared for a short update on your service. What would probably be helpful ahead of that is you just say hello and introduce yourselves in the chat, because I'm aware on these meetings quite often it's quite interesting to know who else is on the call, and based on the timings this morning we're not going to have time to go around and do a round robin of introductions, I'm afraid, so do say hello in the chat. So our first speaker on the agenda will be Tom, but I thought it would be just useful to set a little bit of context from a voluntary and community sector perspective around the work of this group and what we do. So the South Warwickshire Place Partnership is not an entity in its own right. It is a collaborative partnership of organisations across South Warwickshire, including groups such as the South Warwickshire Foundation Trust, GP federations, us as voluntary and community sector representatives, fire and rescue, partners from Warwickshire County Council, Stratford District Council, Warwick District Council. So there's a large network of partners that meet. And as part of that work, we've recognised in our lead role as voluntary and community sector that there needs to be better communication with the wider voluntary and community sector. And as part of that, the programme has funded some activity for us to put on these engagement events. So we delivered one at Brunswick Healthy Living Centre back in November, and we have another two scheduled after this, the next one being in Snitterfield. And we also put out quite a lot of comms through our eGrapevine newsletter and our local bulletins. So I'd really encourage you to keep up to speed with those. Longer term, our aspiration with our voluntary and community sector partners is that there is opportunity for you to be supporting some of the local working groups as they evolve. It's still early days really in that process. On the South Warwickshire Place programme, we're looking at alignment with the Integrated Care System and Integrated Care Board. So Tom will give you an update on where the group is at. But I felt it was helpful just to give a little bit of context on where we're at really in terms of this process. So I'll stop presenting because I assume Tom's got some slides he wants to share, and I'll let Tom take over. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction, Tracy. I have not shared my screen on Zoom before, so
okay,
let's see what happens if I press that and then press that. Right, are people seeing my presentation? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Now if I go into, I think I need to put it in presenter mode, don't I, from the beginning? Let's see what happens with that. Okay, can people still hear me?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Sorry, how my system's set up, I cannot see the Zoom tab now, so I can't see anybody. so I'm gonna assume that you're all still there, but I'm just gonna crack on. Yeah, please do interject at any point. So thank you so much for inviting me. As Tracy said, my name's Tom Day, and I'm basically like the partnership manager for South Warwickshire. And my job is it's a lot about facilitation. There's a bit of strategy in there. It's a really interesting job, something that I really enjoy. And coming to speak to you guys is one of the highlights, to be honest. I have 15 years sort of in local government, working in community services before joining the NHS. So well aware of the importance of you guys, and really want to make sure that you're in the loop with things. What I want to cover today, if I can get it to go to the next slide. I'm having trouble going to the next slide. Sorry, guys, I'm having issues. Would
you like to ping your slides over, Tom?
Yeah, I've sent them over.
Okay, you start talking, and I'll try and present.
Thank you. Sorry, I couldn't seem to do anything there. Okay, so and now I've got the bin lorry turned up outside, so apologies if you can hear the noise. So the things that I wanted to cover in the session today was to do a bit of an update on the health and care system, raise awareness of the core 20 plus 5 models, talk about a couple of new exciting projects that we've been able to launch and lead on in South Warwickshire, update you on some particular groups of inequality that we'd like the system to sort of recognise and highlight as groups who face particular issues. And then lastly, get some feedback from you guys on our 5-year vision for South Warwickshire Place, because we're doing a bit of a review, and it's always good to get some ideas. Next slide, please. So update on the health and care system. I'm not going to spend too much time on the governance, but I think it's always useful to know some of the key words and key partnerships, because they are bandied around quite a bit. So for those of you unfamiliar with the NHS and care and the system and governance and how it works, there's sort of 3 levels that we've got in Coventry and Warwickshire. The first is the system, which is Coventry and Warwickshire. So when you hear people say the system, it was a new thing for me when I joined the NHS. They mean, in this case, Coventry and Warwickshire. At that level, you've got the Joint Health and Wellbeing Forum, which is the 2 health and wellbeing boards. So Coventry is a city council, has a health and wellbeing board, and Warwickshire has one. You've got the Integrated Care Partnership. So this is health and care coming together under that agenda that we need to be integrating health and care a lot more strongly. So that will have the county council, the city council, social care. It will have health services. We've also got the Integrated Care Board, which is the one that divvies up all the money. We had GP commissioning for a few years. Now that's gone to the Integrated Care Board, which has widened the number of people involved, I think, in making those commissioning decisions. You've also got things called care collaboratives. These are sort of a reasonably new initiative by the government, and it's about bringing together providers. So, for example, the hospitals, so George Eliot, University Hospital, Coventry, and South and Warwick Hospital, to, you know, I guess just try and make efficiencies and work together. It's about collaboration. You know, we shouldn't be at Warwick Hospital, we shouldn't be competing against George Eliot or Coventry. Actually, we need to be working together and sharing inefficiencies and innovative ideas. And you've got those for primary care, which obviously covers GP surgeries, and also mental health. At the Warwickshire level, then we've got obviously the Health and Wellbeing Board and a care collaborative there as well. The care collaborative, you know, it's adult social care. It's the hospitals, and it's about joining up of those services. And then you also have the places. So within Warwickshire, you have 3 places. You have South Warwickshire, which obviously we're in, Rugby, and North Warwickshire. Coventry is a lot easier because it's a unitary, it's a city. All of this is a lot simpler in Coventry, but it's a bit more complicated in Warwickshire. And ultimately what we want to do is make sure that South Warwickshire punches at or above its weight in terms of the system. We want to be feeding information up to the system in terms of what local priorities are. We want to be proving to the system that South Warwickshire can manage budgets and stuff, because we want more of that responsibility moving forward. And we've spent a lot of time over the last 18 months setting ourselves up to sort of be ready for that. We're not quite there yet, but that's absolutely the ambition. Next slide, please. So just to put on your radar, in case you haven't seen this nifty diagram, this is the core 20 plus 5. So at the moment, there are a lot of the decisions in terms of what's funded and how resources are allocated happens at that system level. And the core 20 plus 5 is a big part of that. So I just think it's probably good if people aren't aware of this, just to be aware of it, because if you're doing funding bids or anything like that, it's always good just to reference in there, because it is the in thing sort of in health and care at the moment, and something really to reference. So what it is basically is the core 20 part, as you can see sort of from the diagram, refers to the areas of multiple deprivation, specifically the 20% most deprived areas. Now, this is a bit of an issue for us in South Warwickshire, because we only have one of those areas, which is in Lillington. We only have one area. Well, Rugby, North Warwickshire have more areas in there. So that's the core. That's what the core 20 means. The plus part is actually about recognising that not all deprivation and not all health inequality happens in the 20% most deprived areas. There are actually cohorts of people, gypsies and travellers, people new to this country. It might be people with additional needs. Actually face a lot of health inequality and aren't nicely packaged up and live in specific areas. So the plus part recognises that it's not just about the areas of deprivation. And then the 5 is 5 clinical areas. So these are areas that are a top priority for the NHS. This is where you've got the backlogs. This is where you've got, these are the things that cost the money. These are the things that are going to kill people sooner rather than later, and things that we absolutely need to be on top of. So, it's around maternity, it's around mental health, it's around your lungs and respiratory, it's around cancer diagnosis, and it's about your high blood pressure as well as your smoking cessation. So this for us has been something that we've been working towards in order to try and get as many resources as possible in South Warwickshire, noting the core 20 part is a bit of a limiting factor. Next slide, please. There's also a children and young persons core 20 plus 5. So this is a bit more recent, but it's the same sort of thing. So you've got that focus on the core 20 areas. You've got the plus groups, and you've also got the clinical areas to focus on. And in terms of young people and health, the priorities for the NHS are around asthma, diabetes, epilepsy, oral health, and mental health. Those areas. Next slide, please. So what in order to get projects off the ground led by South Warwickshire, obviously in South Warwickshire we do a lot of influencing. So, you know, there's a new healthy lifestyle service that the County Council are commissioning. We're going to be involved in making sure that's a success, doing that sort of collaboration, sharing information. But actually, as I mentioned at the start, we want South Place to hold more resources in the future, and we want to make sure that we're an effective partnership. So we've been developing some key projects over the last 12 months. One of them is Children in Crisis. So this is about supporting young people, children, young people, 12 to 17, who've attended A&E in crisis twice in the last 12 months. So these young people don't really have a physical issue when they're attending A&E. It's more that it's to do with mental health. And actually, if young people and their families are attending A&E, gosh, you know, that's an area that we absolutely need to look at. In terms of numbers wise, it's hundreds. You know, it's a lot. So this is an area that we wanted resources for. Going back to the Core 20+5, which is how the resources are allocated, we needed external funding for this. So we put a bid together where we would be employing some dedicated care coordinators who would focus on Lillington, which is our Core 20 area. We put Brunswick as well, and Stratford and Arden primary care networks. So these are our areas of more deprivation in South Warwickshire. Unfortunately, the system, the ICB, was supportive of this. You know, they're not just completely dogmatic that it has to be a Core 20 area, but there has to be obviously that focus on inequality and areas of deprivation. So if you were on this presentation, I'm sure will be made available after. You can sort of play bingo if you want afterwards. So you can look at mental health and children and young people in the areas, and you can go back to that Core 20 in children, and you can see how many we ticked off. But basically, that's been our job, is how we can support that Pet Care 20 plus Core 20+5. This project's been led by South Warwickshire GP Federation. It's only just getting started, so it'd be really good to come and update you, because I think this is about making sure that there is support available for young people in the community, as well as those sorts of clinical services. Next slide, please. Another project which we've just received confirmation of part funding for is around respiratory health in Lillington. Again, you're clocking the Lillington, which is our Core 20 area. Lung conditions, they are really important in the NHS to get on top of. You know, they cover things like asthma, COPD, chronic bronchitis, emphysema. You know, you've got even long COVID, I guess, is in there. And all the data shows that there is a higher prevalence of this in more deprived communities. But yet, if you look at primary care data, if you look at the people that are coming forward for help, actually there's fewer proportions in these areas as well, which actually suggests that what we need to do is change the narrative a bit. Actually, we need to do some community development work. We need to find new ways of raising awareness of respiratory health, because as we all know, the sooner you identify something or recognize a health issue in yourself or your family, the better your long-term outcomes. For that reason, because we want this to be a sort of rooted in the community, it's not going to be based at a GP or the hospital. Actually, it's going to be this role is going to be based at the district council, because, well, partly because housing actually has a lot to do with it. And if we go on to the next slide, please. Actually, there's a lot to do with respiratory health and how we can improve it. Obviously, the focus of the meeting today is on the environment, and that's a really big factor in respiratory health. So what you've got here is population health, another buzzword that you may or may not have heard of, which is quite big in health. So it's always good to reference population health. And basically what it means is that only a small part of your health outcomes is probably going to be down to health services. The vast majority of your health outcomes in your life is going to be dependent actually on these wider things. It's about the wider determinants of health, where you live, you know, it's about that air quality, it's about access to parks and nature. It's to do with your health behaviors and lifestyles, so whether you smoke, whether you do physical activity, whether you're eating healthy, to do with your community. So is there a lot of support in your community? Is it a place where there's where there's good air quality, where there's opportunities for social prescribing, access to those spaces, along with obviously, ultimately you need to make sure that we need to make sure that we've got those health services in place. So if in terms of this project, then we're only just getting it off the ground. If there is anything that our colleagues, that any of you come up with that you think would enhance this project in terms of boosting respiratory health, to do with anything really that you think would enhance this project, my contact details are available. So please do let me know, because we want this to be wider than health. That's exactly why it's not going to be a health role. Next slide, please. So another thing that we're doing is we're trying to boost the awareness of other cohorts of people in South Warwickshire that might face inequality. From a resource point of view, we do struggle because we only have that one area. What the system has asked places to do is come up with some suggestions backed up by evidence of local plus groups. So again, back to that core 20 plus 5, that the system will look at sort of including. I don't know how they'll include it. I don't know if it will be as far, if it will influence resources in the future, but these are the ones that we're suggesting. These are only draft at the moment, so they're not for quoting in funding bids or anything right now, but we would really like the system to take more account of rural poverty. We know, that fuel poverty and is a really big area, a really big issue in rural areas. We know that if you're in a low income household but within an affluent area, actually you face a lot of inequality. There's you need to cut. 88% of people in rural areas need a car or use a car to access services. If you don't have a car for whatever reason, actually it becomes a lot more difficult. And that's compounded if you're an older person and you've got a low income as well. Older people living in income deprivation, just generally, is something that we're putting forward. With that one, we're going to do some further work if the sort of system is happy with this, to try and refine it down, because the idea of having these plus groups or groups facing inequality is it needs to be manageable. It needs to be less than your whole population, but probably more than just a few people. So it's something for us to work on. But if anybody has any insights or would like us to consider anything as part of this, then let me know. It'd be useful to have any sort of data or information or feedback. There's also children needing additional educational support is another one. So that's picking up the children's core 20 plus 5. There's probably the headline statistic in this area is that less than 50% of the children in South Warwickshire who are on free school meals sort of hit their development milestones when they start school, and that's the lowest in Warwickshire, which surprised me when I saw it. We also have we have fewer children, who are on free school meals, but those children, sort of are struggling a lot more, and you could various hypotheses as to why that is, to do with COVID, to do with the fact that when these children were younger, the groups, the opportunities for socialization perhaps weren't there. And so the development milestones are about physical, they're about fine motor skills, they're about behavior, they're about sort of your toilet and your hygiene, as well as basic things like being able to hold a pen and scribe and stuff. So this is an area where we really want to focus on. So hopefully we'll have some good news regarding this, and we'll be able to define it a bit further over the next 12 months, and this will start to influence some of the resources. Next slide, please. And then finally, we are reviewing our 5-year vision for South Warwickshire. So this is what we developed through a collaborative process. So as Tracy said, we absolutely want to make sure that everybody's bought in. And doing visions is always quite tricky, because you want to make it simple but not bland, and you want it to reflect actually what our ambition is for South Warwickshire, trying to pick up on any what we need in South Warwickshire, but in a way that's quite snappy as well. It's quite challenging. I don't know if anybody here is really good at visions. Please, some feedback on this would be most welcome. I think there is. We do absolutely want to slim it down. So there's been a suggestion about cutting it down to something like support or enable everyone to live well and have full, active, independent lives. So sort of picking up some of the middle of that vision, sort of like in a one-liner. But as I say, answers on an e-postcard and send them through. We're open to suggestions and ideas on this. And that's me done. Thank you very much.
Tom, much appreciated. I'll give a brief apologies for my ongoing croaky voice. I've had a bout of illness and my voice is periodically not playing ball. So if I dip out too much, Gemma will sort of sweep in and rescue me. We will add a couple of questions to our feedback survey on the vision, and also the proposed strategy stuff, so you can give feedback through that route if that's okay. So I'm just going to reshare my screen again.
Thank you, appreciate that.
So in true style, we've already running over time. So I'm going to do a bit of a whistle stop tour of the bit in the middle that I was going to do some content on. So let me just try and get this onto full screen again. Is that working okay for everyone? Yeah. Great. So there's a couple of slides for you to read through at your leisure. So the first one was just a bit of context of the first session and some of the things that were identified through the last session that we ran. So when you get the slides, have a read through and come back to if you've got any questions. We did 2 breakout sessions at the first event that we held. One was around some of the challenges for voluntary community sector organisations, and there were a number of challenges that were presented that you'll see from the slides. The headlines being issues around funding, particularly the challenge of ongoing funding for core costs, some of the waiting lists for both statutory health service and also voluntary and community social enterprise sector services, services being apportioned disproportionately, capacity for voluntary and community sector organisations to attend networking events and other activity updates, communication, what's been available versus what's actually needed, the ongoing challenge around volunteer capacity, and quite a key one really, which links back to some of the discussion Tom has just had around mental health need, that actually people coming forward for services are presenting complex and multiple differing types of health need. We've moved away from that. People come for one service, they come with a sort of a plethora of needs and issues that need to be supported. We then had a look at some of the opportunities we as a sector collaboration could bring to address some of those. So that ongoing partnership working, which hopefully these events are starting to galvanise some activity around, better methods of communication, utilising new technologies, and then having a look a bit further down the list at looking at applying for different types of funding, and also using sort of the forthcoming elections as an opportunity to influence local councillors and MPs around their strategies locally. So I'm going to have a go at issuing a quick poll and see if our views have changed somewhat from the last session. So I've not done one of these before, so strap yourselves in. Let's see what happens. Okay, so it's quite interesting seeing the feedback from the poll. So I'm going to keep talking while the rest of you are finishing off. So as expected, really, most of you are highlighting the biggest challenge organisationally at the moment is around funding for core costs or delivery costs. closely followed by capacity within staff and volunteer resources, and then that increased demand on services, which are both level pegging, with the complex needs of service users being a little lower down the list. 94% of you that have answered have highlighted needs that can't be met through your services. And of the list of options that I gave you, mental health is high. Also, complex needs of service users, which is actually higher than the mental health need, closely followed by that increased demand on sessions and activities, and then pretty level pegging that reduced volunteer capacity. And then the final question I asked you about was from the issues we identified at the last workshop, which was the most important to you, and funding sustainability is the key one that's come up on that. And then secondly, capacity for services, and thirdly, barriers for service users aligned to cost of living, travel, etc. So we're pretty consistent with our findings from the last session. Your position hasn't changed. So thanks very much. That's brilliant. So Gemma very kindly put together this this slide for me. So the final thing we looked at really was around from the feedback around some of the we've called it threats, which is probably a strong word, but the issues that came up were around the fact that the sector could feel undervalued in terms of work with more of the statutory and strategic partners, a concern around voluntary and community sector organisations ceasing to operate or having impacts due to cost of living, retention and ongoing recruitment of staff. And there were particular themes around general staff wellbeing coming out of a COVID-19 pandemic straight into a cost of living crisis, and everyone really not moving out of that fight or flight kind of situation. There are key themes consistently around that lack of volunteer capacity, and also there were some comments around planning for situations of crisis. I don't think any of us could have planned particularly well for the cost of living, for the COVID pandemic. But we've had a little bit more readiness in terms of seeing how things are going to progress with the current cost of living constraints. Not that that's helped with a lot of the capacity constraint issues that have been in place. Also, some key things around use of language and communication. If there was anything that came upon any of the health and wellbeing presentations that Tom didn't demystify, do let us know, because we're keen to kind of not use acronyms where we can really in this forum. So we got some feedback from you on some of the priorities, and we'd like you to keep feeding back to us really. So I'll let you review the notes that are shared on the slides with that. And then we did a bit of a cross-check of the findings and feelings from you as a group against some of the national research that's been done by the National Association of Voluntary and Community Action, who are the national body that Carver kind of get umbrella support from. And the consistency around themes was the same really. It's around accessing funding, appropriate use and management of finances, services having to adapt, that staff wellbeing, and also recruitment of volunteers, and then relationships with those statutory organisations. So we're not in an exclusive position here really in South Warwickshire compared to the national position. So I'd encourage you to read through all of the slides that I haven't been able to do in full detail and come back to us if you've got any questions. You've got Gemma's details and my details if you need to come back to us. We're a couple of minutes over, but I'm going to hand over to Amanda and Anna with a hope that we can be done for the break about 10:55. No pressure, ladies, if you are happy to start your presentation.
Thanks, Tracy. I think Anna's going to share the slides. We should be okay for time because Tom already mentioned quite a lot of stuff that I'm going to talk about, so it's fine. So, perfect. So I'm Amanda Evans. I'm the Team Wilder Director at Warwickshire Wildlife Trust, and I oversee our health and wellbeing team, as well as kind of our people team really. So our Action for Nature team, our volunteer team, and also our education team. Anna, do you want to introduce yourself at this point? And then
so I am Anna Wright. I'm the Health and Wellbeing Manager. So I look after the health and wellbeing delivery on the ground and actively seek funding to try and keep that work going. I apologise for the hat and the thick coat. We've got no heating at Brandon today, which is not good for your wellbeing at all. So if I look like I'm dressed up for the Arctic, that's why.
do you want to click on through the next couple of slides, Anna? Oh. So a bit about us, really. So we manage over 65 nature reserves across Coventry, Warwickshire and Solihull now, and have been doing that since 1970. We've recently embarked on a new strategy which really accounts for really tries to respond to the crises that are going on at the moment, both the climate crisis, the ecological crisis, but also the human health crisis, and how all of those things link together. So our vision is of a thriving natural world where wildlife plays a really valued role in addressing all three of those kind of emergencies that are all going on at the same time. So our purpose is to bring wildlife back, and from kind of my perspective and my team's perspective is to really help people act for nature, but also value nature and understand what nature brings to them and the importance particularly of nature to their own health and well-being, both in terms of maintaining their own health and well-being, but also the impact that a good natural environment has on people's population health and well-being. So we are really ambitious in our desire to reverse the decline in nature. Hopefully some of you might have seen Wild Isles by David Attenborough on Sunday night, where we really highlighted how there is a huge decline in species and how we really need to act to bring our nature back into recovery, really. So we speak with a bold and confident voice, and will explain the state of nature and what we can all do to help to put it into recovery. Next slide, please. So our strategy basically aims for two things: 30% of land in recovery, protected and connected for nature by 2030, and 1 in 4 people in Warwickshire, Coventry and Solihull taking action for nature. So 30% of land in recovery means that we need to work with a whole range of people to ensure that happens. Although we have 65 nature reserves, we are nowhere near 30% of land in Warwickshire. And there is a huge piece of work going on through our nature recovery team and our reserves team to look for new land that we can take on, but also, and probably more importantly, to support landowners like farmers, businesses, to manage their land in a way that's positive for nature. And then 1 in 4 people taking action is really the tipping point. So social science shows that if you can get 25% of people doing something, it becomes the social norm, and it just feels like it's the normal thing to do. So conservation isn't the thing that a few people do in this little sector of Warwickshire and Coventry and Solihull, but it's something that everybody does and everybody can have an impact with. So next slide, please. So our 1 in 4 people taking action is all about us developing Team Wilder, and that's about empowering and enable people to take action that bring about nature's recovery. So that is a little bit of a shift in what we've done traditionally, where we've gone into lots of communities and we've done projects with them, but then funding has come to an end and we've not necessarily been able to continue with that. This is very much about responding to people's needs and people's interests and finding out the ways that people really want to take action and helping them to do that. So how does that all link with health and wellbeing? So back in 2010, the Marmot review, which I'm sure lots of you are familiar with, already recognised the connection between health inequalities and climate change, and recommended these interventions to help reduce the inequalities and to help mitigate climate change. So some of those are very obviously linked to green space. So improving access to good quality and open green spaces, lots kind of around transport and food and housing, but also really about removing barriers to community participation and action. And that's one of the things that we really are aiming to do through Team Wilder, and to help reduce social isolation, which we know is a big problem across Warwickshire, in particular South Warwickshire. So levels of access to green space are much more likely to be worse for people in deprived areas and for higher proportions of minority ethnic groups. And deprived areas on average have 9 times less access to green space. And alongside that tend to also have higher concentrations of fast food outlets and more limited availability of healthy food options. Next slide, please. So 10 years later, the Marmot review team found that, as I've just mentioned, that access to nature is worse for people in deprived area and those with higher proportions of minority ethnic groups. We are very conscious that as a wildlife trust, we are not particularly diverse. So one of our kind of ambitions through Team Wilder is to engage a much more diverse audience. So Anna's been really working closely with Equip and doing some taster sessions with different ethnic groups to really try and understand how they want to access nature or any barriers that they might have, and helping them to feel confident in doing that and making a connection to nature, which then makes them want to act for nature. Health harm from climate change is increasing and is likely to affect more deprived communities the most. Air quality and associated health risks have emerged as a major equity issue. And climate change affects health and worsens inequalities. And in that sense, older people and lower income groups are most at risk. So particularly in South Warwickshire, where there's a higher population of older people, that can potentially be a significant issue that we need to think about. I think exposure to air pollutants is estimated to cut short 28 to 36,000 lives a year. And again, that exposure has been linked to deprivation and ethnicity. So in the most deprived areas of London, people from non-white groups have been found to be more exposed to higher concentrations of nitrogen oxide associated with traffic fumes. So lots of kind of impacts that the climate and the declining climate can have on people's health. Next slide, please. I think this is something Tom touched on around health inequalities, and it may be something that you've seen before. And it's from, I think it's from the Glasgow University, and was published in the Lancet. And basically what it says, if you are richer, the greener the neighbourhood you live is likely to be, and therefore you are likely to have less illness. If you're less wealthy, then you tend to experience more illness, but your health improves more than theirs with increasing greenness to where you live. So if you are in a more deprived area, then you're likely to suffer the poorest health, but could get the greatest benefit from living somewhere green. So actually, increasing green space in the more deprived communities can have a huge impact on the health of those communities as well. Next slide, please, Anne. So this is, I don't know how well you're going to be able to see this actually, but it's quite an interesting graphic, and it'll be obviously sent around afterwards, but it kind of shows you the examples of direct and indirect examples of direct and indirect impacts of climate change on mental health outcomes particularly. So we have communities directly affected by climate impacts. Obviously, then there's things like loss and damage to homes and properties, crop and livestock damage, loss of habitats, community breakdowns, all sorts of things that ultimately is going to lead to new cases of mental ill health, increased symptoms of pre-existing health conditions, but also increased susceptibility to physical ill health. And generally worsened population health overall as mental and emotional distress increases with these increasing number of extreme climate incidents. I think it's a really important kind of connection for us to make in terms of connecting all of those impacts. You know, we hear about floods quite frequently now in this country and abroad. And the impact that has on people's health is massively significant. When people are losing livelihoods, they're losing their homes, and really there's just a complete interconnection between how our climate and the quality of our natural environment can be to our health. Next slide. That's great. So we are, as part of this, there's two areas of our work really. So we are delivering direct interventions to help people who are experiencing mental health to improve their well-being and usually to improve increased physical activity as well. But the other side of what we do is really about advocacy and really kind of promoting this message that access to green space is really, really important. Particularly around developments, but also declines and funding cuts to parks teams have meant that actually lots of those green spaces have decreased in quality. And actually now 1 in 3 of us can't always access healthy nature near our home. So there is a huge benefit in increasing access to green space for communities. And there are some things that are being put in place to try and help that. So there are now some green infrastructure standards, which are basically recommending that people have access to good quality nature within 15 minutes walk. And also within the NHS, there has been a consideration now around how they can incorporate natural environment and mitigate climate change, both within their buildings, so the healthcare's impact on nature, including things like pharmaceutical pollution, and also the role that healthcare plays in improving access to nature. And in those scenarios, we can be talking about things around green social prescribing. So social prescribing essentially, but for access to green spaces, water interventions like Anna's going to talk about that we deliver on our reserves or in community green spaces. I think it's in Canada, the GPs are able to prescribe an annual pass to their national parks, for example, instead of an antidepressant, maybe. And also healthcare's roadmap to biodiversity net gain on their estate. So looking at their hospitals and all the buildings and the property that they own, and looking at how they can increase biodiversity on their sites as well. So all of these things are the kind of things that we are advocating for, and we are asking you and others within the healthcare sector to advocate for as well. Anna, do you want to jump in at this stage? And you're on mute.
Do you want me to pick up from here then?
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. So as Amanda's mentioned, we, as well as advocating and really understanding the science behind why nature is good for our well-being, we also deliver a range of on-the-ground interventions. Some of those have been going on for sort of 8 years now, others are kind of still in their infancy. And as was alluded to earlier on, one of the biggest challenges that we face is funding for those interventions, beginning to get people to recognise the value that nature can bring, not just to mental health, but also physical health for people. So as Amanda's already said, exposure to, access to and connection with nature can help provide a buffer against mental ill health, but it also significantly improves people's physical health as well. And I'll give you a few examples of that in a minute. So one of the projects that we, I'll just lift up on this one. So spending at least 120 minutes a week in nature was associated with improved estimates of good health and well-being. Actually, it can be a lot less than that. And for a lot of people that we work with, just 10 minutes to start off with, and then building up to significantly longer across the course of a week can bring significant benefits. There's lots of evidence now that even just nature viewing from a window can be incredibly good for our well-being, and it's been encouraged in some hospitals that actually creating nature views can really improve patients' ability to recover. And there's a really nice story about 2 people that are in a hospital bed, and one of them is blind and is unable to have a look out the window, and the person next to him talks every day about what the view out the window looks like, and you know, there's beautiful snowdrops out there today, and oh gosh, it's a bit windy, or it's and the person in the bed who's unable to see is constantly saying, thank you, it's so great to be able to picture and kind of envisage what that looks like. And his recovery is much quicker from his injuries than the hospital were expecting. And actually, when they came to discharge him, he was saying, I'd love to be able to go outside and just see the space. And they said, well, there isn't really anything out there. And actually, the gentleman next to him had been telling him about this wonderful view out of his window, and that's helped improve his recovery significantly just by imagining that green space, not even being able to see it. So there's significant evidence that actually just having the view of a green space, or even just being able to imagine what that would look like for people, can be incredibly good in terms of their recovery. Just spending time outside, doing even just walking, it doesn't need to be a significant intervention. Any level of exercise that's outside is actually better for you, is now proved to be better for you than exercise that's indoors. And we found nationally, it's been found there's a significant reduction in the experience of stress and also blood pressure. And Amanda talked quite a lot about the proximity to natural environment being associated with lower stress. There's also lots of evidence that physical health can be improved as a result of spending time outside, as we've just talked about. And there's lots of consistent evidence that the amount of natural environment around the home is associated with lower rates of mortality as well. Again, Amanda's talked about that already. Exposure to green space may also help reduce obesity and actively increase the levels of physical activity for people. So one of the interventions that we run locally is called the Environment of Me. We've been running this for, it's fast approaching 8 years now. It offers wellbeing activities in nature for people. We don't tend to talk a lot about mental ill health in our advertising. We talk about well-being for people because we find that sometimes the phrase mental ill health can be a little bit off-putting. So we talk quite a lot about people's well-being and sense of well-being to encourage and engage them to come outside with us. It's amazing how many people feel like they can't access nature or use it because they don't know anything about it, and that feels quite daunting to them. And actually what we're trying to encourage is that you don't need to know a lot to be able to go out and enjoy it. You don't need to be an expert. There's no need to know what that flower is called or what that bird is called to be able to go out and just enjoy those moments. We offer allotment-based gardening. So for people with more severe and enduring mental health who often have comorbidities with physical health conditions as well, we tend to do a sort of slower based start with them, doing allotment based gardening and building up their sort of social resilience and also their physical capacity as well. We run a range of 5 ways to wellbeing courses. They are out in the communities themselves. Rather than expecting people to come to us, we go to them and deliver those in local parks. They are based, as you'd probably expect, around the 5 ways to wellbeing. They are actually a 6-week course. So we have each week is themed around one of the 5 ways, all about trying to find ways that people can then use those in their daily lives. So rather than teaching them things that actually might be difficult for them to go back and replicate at home, we're showing them things that they could do to build nature into their daily life. So how can you use your mobile phone to take some macro photos and then go back and really look at the minutiae of the world around us? How can you experience the different senses in nature as you're walking through a space rather than just marching through it? How could you sound map a space? So close your eyes and listen to the sounds that are around you. And those are things that cost no money and could be done on a daily basis to help people keep that connection with nature. We also run an 8-week bushcraft programme, which is slightly more immersive. So the 5 ways courses tend to be in kind of more community green spaces. The bushcraft courses are in far more immersive green spaces, kind of woodland spaces where people feel as though we've really taken them away from the world that they're quite used to and to put them into a space that for some can feel very unfamiliar to start off with. But it's amazing how quickly people's shoulders drop when you put them around a fire and they're under a canopy of trees and they get the chance to just, for many of them, breathe again for the first time in a while. We also run a range of wellbeing walks, again, some in communities. We're also increasingly doing these for businesses as well, who've recognised that their staff, just like many of us, I'm sure, look at the lunch break and think, actually, I could just sit and get a few more emails done, or I'll eat my lunch at my desk. And I think workplaces are now recognising that for both the physical and mental health, but also for the productivity of their staff, encouraging them to go out and have half an hour at lunchtime, walk in some fresh air and take in their surroundings is really beneficial to them. We've just started a couple of new groups as well. One's social gardeners and one is social birders. And again, this is for people who might think, oh, I'm not sure about gardening or going bird watching. I don't think I'll be very confident with that. Actually, the primary driver for us with those groups is about people socialising with each other. I just wanted to share a couple of case studies, actually. One is of a lady who's just joined us for a bushcraft course. She has long COVID and hasn't left the house for about a year. Her father passed away from COVID as well, and she was really struggling with her mental health. Our bushcraft course popped up on Eventbrite, and she said because it was well-being focused and it was outside, she felt like she'd like to give it a try. She'd been to a few indoor interventions, but had found maintaining eye contact with people very difficult, and had found the uncomfortable silences that she had with therapists when she wasn't able to talk openly very uncomfortable. She found the environment around the fire to be much healthier for her in terms of being able to express herself. When you're around a fire, there's no need to make eye contact, and you've not got the uncomfortable silence you get in a room because nature fills that silence for you with bird call or the crackling of the fire. And so she found that a really helpful environment to be in. And for the first week, she was very quiet. In the second week, she built up a bit of a relationship with the leader and started talking a bit more openly about herself and her struggles. And by the third week, she was chatting to the other participants. And this is something she said she hadn't done in a year, to socialise with people. What the course also did to her was to push her to be slightly more physically active than she had been in a while, but without really realising that she was doing it. And it wasn't until she left the course on week 3 that she realised that she'd walked further and done more than she'd done in quite a long time. And quite miraculously, she then went onto Eventbrite and found a local tennis group that was running a women's only session, just a 1-hour taster. And she booked herself on as a result of doing that increased physical activity through bushcraft, and is now signed up to take part in a regular tennis session. Those small steps in an environment that feels comfortable for people, I think, can be really beneficial. Another example I just wanted to give that Amanda mentioned earlier on, we're doing a little bit of work with Equip at the moment to look at how we can reach out to communities who perhaps are even more removed from the natural environment and don't see how it could play a role in their daily lives. And I've had the pleasure of working with a Syrian ladies group up in Nuneaton. And when I first got there, they weren't really sure how they'd want to play outside with me. They weren't quite sure what kind of activities I could offer. And we spent the first session indoors, just having a look at some vegetation and making some small bird feeders. And on the next session, I took out some tiny macro lenses that you can just click onto your mobile phone. And they said, we're not sure about going for a walk. I said, we're not going to go for a walk. We're just going to step outside the front of the centre and we're going to see what nature we could see. And everybody sort of looked at me as if to say, well, there isn't anything, you know, we're in the middle of Nuneaton and there's a park, but it's just grass. They clipped the macro lenses onto their phones and started exploring. And within a few minutes, they'd got photos of little dewdrops, but hyper close, you know, you could almost see the clouds in the dewdrops. They were finding all the different colours they could possibly find. And at such a tiny macro level, we didn't have to go very far for them to explore it. And they absolutely loved that session and the awe that you could see in their faces when they were capturing those images. Again, really simple, but really showing people how they can engage with that outside space and build it into their everyday lives. And they've all now asked me for the Amazon link as to how they can get a macro lens to clip onto their phones. So it's providing opportunities for people to spend, you know, either quite a long amount of time, in 8 weeks with us in a woodland setting, being really immersive, or something which as a starting point for them is quite simple and something that they can use in their everyday lives to show them how nature can be part of their recovery. And actually they're kind of recovering nature at the same time. And there's almost a dual story there. Actually, they're helping nature and nature's helping them, and that kind of comfort between the two, I think. Let's hope this plays.
Do anything else? Oh, okay.
Anna, it's a bit crackly here.
I'm just trying to see if I can.
Perhaps because of times, we're at 11:05 now. We can send out the link afterwards, if that's all right.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine.
Is that all right? Thank you.
Yeah. It's taking all of my computer's effort to keep me on the screen at the moment, so I'm going to see if I can. Yeah, I'm going to see if I can stop sharing for a second. Am I really glitchy for all of you as well?
You are, but we can hear you clearly. So, oh, you've calmed into a still picture now.
Let me see if I can.
Well, that's just sorting out. What we'll do is when we get to the break, we'll confirm the revised timings, and then we'll we'll try and rework our schedule for a bit later.
So I think that was one of the last things that Anna was going to cover anyway as part of this and kind of this first bit. So should we break now?
Yeah, that would be grand. So if we could try and come back by 11:15, so if we take a 10-minute break. So do you want to introduce the break, Amanda, and then we'll try and be back for 11:15.
I can do, yeah. So we've talked a lot about green space. So in this 10 minutes, we would really like you to go and grab your cup of tea and go and sit outside in your garden if you happen to have a garden. Or if you have some plants in your house, just go and sit by the greenery for a little while. If you don't have any of that, we are going to attempt to play some images of green spaces. So even if you don't have access to a green space, then go grab a cup of tea and come and just sit and watch some nice imagery from some of Anna's projects and some of our photos. So I will try and set that playing, because Anna's doesn't seem to like playing with very much at the moment. And we'll see you back here in 10 minutes.
Beautiful, Kath.
Very impressive, Kath. Very impressive.
Oh, thanks for the introduction.
So we'll see you at 11:15, everyone. Thank you.
was a lovely break, wasn't it? I'm just wondering how many people are back, but they haven't turned their cameras on after the session.
Right, Amanda's going to share a short video with us, and then what will happen with some magical trickery, if I've done this right, you'll get assigned to a breakout room for some discussion topics. Based on timescales, we're going to bring you back from the discussion rooms at about 20 to 12 to allow some time for feedback and then a bit of review before we close. If when we're doing the feedback there are any updates you would like to share on your group's activities, I would ask probably that you email those to Gemma, and we'll do a written update to everyone that's attended after the session. We've just run out of time today. We've been over optimistic with our content, so Gemma will drop her details in the chat. You'll also get a short survey link put in the chat as well for you to complete, which will be sent to you afterwards as well. But Amanda, I think if you're ready, if you'd like to show your video, and then after that I'll assign people into the breakout rooms. Right, so we're going to move out into the breakout rooms now. You will be assigned to one of 3 rooms. So Gemma will be facilitating one room, Chris Freeman another, and I will try and join the 3rd one to facilitate that one. So we'll pop the facilitators have all got the questions for the breakout sessions. So if you could aim to be back in here by 20 to 12, that would be grand. So hopefully, if I magically open these rooms, all will work without issue. Welcome back, everyone. Right, so Gemma, shall we start with your group to feedback a couple of points on each of the questions?
Yeah, definitely. As I'm sure all the other groups, it was a very interesting conversation. I'm sure we could have spoken for much longer. But in terms of the barriers, common barriers included access to transport or transportation issues, sometimes around finance, confidence, the knowledge of where to go or what to do, sometimes around specialist equipment that might be needed, or the belief that you might need specialist equipment, things like hard standing are parks and green areas accessible if you use a wheelchair, for example. In terms of how we break down those barriers, it was interesting that Kath from ARC was mentioning that they try and badge some of their activities as social activities, which you just happen to be outside in nature for. So in terms of the way that you communicate and spread the awareness about preparing and giving reassurance, sometimes like buddy systems, meeting people at gates, and basically encouraging practitioners to know and have access about knowledge, and the way that we can overcome or how extra support can be given to organisations is going back to communicating and networking so that other organisations know about where to signpost. For example, there are resources out there. So for example, ARC have a daily dose of nature leaflet, which hopefully I'll be able to share afterwards. And also things about advocacy, building things into routine, particularly like in the winter months when people are less inclined to go outside, and just everybody being aware that there are sometimes really small, non-costly changes that you can make. So for example, changing the picture that is by a desk to something of nature, when you buy it rather than choosing something else, could make a difference. So that is a quick whistle stop tour of our group.
Thank you, Gemma. Chris, could you give some feedback for your breakout group?
Yeah, of course I can, Tracy. In terms of the barriers, 2 key themes, I suppose. One is knowing what is available locally, and that was a key theme throughout our discussion, really, in terms of that knowledge, and that this issue of not feeling safe in a variety of ways, physically, emotionally, intellectually, not being welcomed, feeling not being welcomed in that green space, and physically also in terms of getting lost, not knowing where to go, not confident to kind of reach out into outdoor space that's unknown, really. So those were just kind of two key themes that came out from the barriers. How do we break down the barriers? Obviously, in a practical sense, in terms of better signage and knowing sure where sites are and making that accessible, a variety of languages, etc., etc. And I think the interesting one on the promotion and knowing what happens locally is having a good mix. Obviously, there's the Strive app for those who are digitally proficient. But then again, is it simply having a local community notice board where you just put up, very basic flyers, etc. Something that's coming out of the work we're doing in Clopton and Bishopton in Stratford is people don't know what's happening in their local community, working down into the community centres and having a simple community notice board on the shop. Or we're also thinking in Stratford of disused shops, having a variety of notice boards on those. Just very simple messages, very cheap, accessible, just what's available. In terms of breaking down funding, that kind of moving from grant funding to longer term core cost funding, project funding, I meant, in terms of time limited, which has its constraints. What do organisations want? I suppose that kind of core cost, longer term funding, so you're not constantly on the mouse wheel of trying to find funding and constantly in that mode. And really, how do you reach people through the networks and the partnerships, those organisations that working with the very people that you want to attract? They have the relationship, they have the confidence of people. How can this partnership and open up those avenues and pathways to the people you want to attract? Working through partners, helping showcase, and being conscious of the very many benefits of being outdoors in green spaces. So that's a whistle-top tour.
Thank you, Chris. That's great. Anna, Tom, thank you for covering the third breakout group. Would you like to, whoever's going to feedback for your breakout?
Do you want me to, Tom?
Yes, please.
Okay. So we had a slightly different discussion in terms of some of the barriers, and I think hopefully Tom won't mind me sharing the fact that he said that he has all of the resources to be able to go out and walk in nature, and actually when we had the break he didn't go outside, just like I didn't either. So there's something around the motivation for people and the driver, and we talked quite a bit about, for some people we actually have the resources, we just don't have the motivation or the want to go and do it, and that can be really limiting. And then for other people, they don't even have the resources to be able to. So there's almost sort of two different groups there we need to think about. We also talked about some practical things in terms of barriers as well. So we talked a bit about planning for new spaces. We talked a bit about housing developments and how when we are designing and developing new communities and also retrofitting old communities, are we designing green spaces to be connected? Are we encouraging people to go from the pocket parks into the slightly wilder spaces? So how can we look at kind of planning when it comes to new green spaces as well? We talked a bit about the barriers around for families, especially in the winter, of actually the parents wanting to go out. So actually the kids probably wouldn't mind being out in the wind and the rain, but the barrier of the parents having the want to go and do that, and the logistics. We also talked a bit about the barriers for transportation for people, and maybe people feeling like they have to go to a destination to go and access nature. So do they need to get on a bus or two buses and go to Coombe Abbey to access nature, or can they use nature at the end of their road? When we talked about the ways we might be able to tackle some of those, the motivation was probably the one that we concentrated on most. And there was a really lovely suggestion. If you think about the 5 a day campaign, and that was really drummed home to people and has changed behaviours. And one of the things that Ted mentioned was, could we have a really simple message about 10 minutes in nature? Could it be something as simple as a public health message, which is 10 minutes in nature, that sits alongside our 5 a day? That's something that organisations that are here and other organisations could start to push as a general public health message to people. But also recognising that for some groups there will still need to be interventions to help handhold them. And so Kate talked a bit about a group that she has been supporting with walks, and a lot of them have still needed that handholding to do that initial first come out. And actually once they've started, the motivation is there for people. And Tom mentioned about kind of actually looking at the data, and rather than having a scattergun approach to trying to engage everybody with nature, should we look at where we feel that we've got people who perhaps are so far removed in terms of nature connectedness that we might maybe start there and have a look at actual interventions, and then more widely in terms of sort of universal health, having a message that people can buy into, which doesn't ask too much of them, but they can understand the health benefits that it would bring of just accessing nature for even 10 to 20 minutes of the day. I think for us the biggest challenge was around translating, for those of us who have the resources but don't, actually a new habit that means that we are using green spaces in the way we know is good for us, but we perhaps don't do it. And then also looking at how we reach out to those communities who don't even know that you don't know what you don't know. So if you don't know that there's a green space at the end of the road or how to use it to engage with it, then we need to break down those barriers to people as well, so that they know that they can go to even just a green space that has no play equipment, nothing else, but they know that there's activities or playful things they can do there, either as a family or even as an adult. And that's it.
Thank you, Anna. That's great. I think there's a stat, isn't there, that it takes 60 days to form a new habit and for it to become routine or something like that. That might be too many days, but I was interested listening to the feedback from the 3 groups. There were some consistencies there, weren't there, but also some differences. And I think that was partly the makeup of the people that were in each of the breakout sessions, coming at it from slightly different angles. So what we'll do is when the facilitators feedback to Gemma, we'll summarise up the notes. Hopefully you found today informative. We've lost a few people who've had to drop off for the meeting, so hopefully the recording will be helpful for you to listen back to, and also to people who had to drop off a little earlier than was planned. Our next event is in May and is in person at Snitterfield, so hopefully we will get a few of you back to that to join us for our next event. We're hoping to do something around collaborations and partnerships at our next event, and are hoping that we might be joined by some of the groups that are doing that well, like the Star Health and Wellbeing Partnership. If you feel organisationally that you have good case examples and would like to do a small slot at our next session in May, if you could let myself or Gemma know, we would really appreciate that. We're keen to make this group as voluntary and community sector led as possible, and we're really appreciative of Amanda and Anna taking the time today to put materials together and get us to think a little more about use of our outdoor spaces. So I'd encourage you to sort of come back to us if you feel that you would have some useful input to our next session. Apologies for all the technical glitches with Zoom today. We're obviously not paying it enough to work properly, but hopefully everyone has managed to hear everything, has taken something away from today. And I think our sort of ask of you is to enjoy the outdoors you've got, or the plants you've got, or pictures online. And I'm certainly taking away the getting away from my desk at lunchtimes and having a bit of a walk rather than powering through the emails and stuff. And Tom and I will work on the fact that we seem to have a lot of health meetings at lunchtimes, which stop us going out and about. But hopefully that's been informative for you. If you've got stuff you'd like us to share with organisations who've attended today, drop us a note and we'll get that out after the meeting. But thanks for your time. You've got a couple of minutes back to have 5 minutes outside in the fresh air, which is a bonus. But thanks for joining us today, and thanks for everyone who's spoken and helped organise today's event. Cheers, everyone.
Thanks, Tracy. Bye.